Hi, everyone. I'm Garrett Hake in for Allison Morris. You're watching NBC News Now, and here's what's happening. President Biden in Belgium for the NATO summit. His message, America is back.
NATO is critically important for U.S. interest in and of itself. I just want all of Europe to know that the United States is there. The United States is there.
We're live with more on the president's commitment to our allies and the new focus on threats from China and Russia.
Are you waging a cyber war against America?
Where is the evidence? Where is proof? It's becoming farcical.
An NBC News worldwide exclusive, Russian President Vladimir Putin one-on-one with NBC's Keir Simmons ahead of Wednesday's summit with President Biden. And the truth will soon be out there. We'll have all the details on the hype building in Washington for the Pentagon's upcoming report on UFOs. We start today with President Biden at the NATO summit. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba is in Geneva. A lot of questions for the president about Vladimir Putin, but he didn't seem to want to give much of a preview of their meeting in Geneva. What did he have to say about the Russian leader and that sit down?
And that's been his strategy, Garrett. This is a president who is saying often he will talk to the press after the meeting. We know he will have a solo press conference on Wednesday after that high-stakes face-to-face meeting with Vladimir Putin does wrap up. And that's because he doesn't want to essentially lay his cards out on the table. He wants to really confront the Russian president, but wants to save that for the actual meeting. So when pressed on what exactly he's going to raise, the president has said certainly cybersecurity, ransomware attacks. We know all of those issues will be raised, Ukraine aggression, things like that as well, in addition to, of course, human rights abuses. But what we don't know is what else and how far the president might go. That's something, again, he's trying to hold back on so far. But we did also get a sense of what he told NATO allies he was going to say to Putin in their meeting, which is now just less than 2 days away. Take a listen to how he framed that message to our closest allies.
And I pointed out that we're facing a once-in-a-century global health crisis. At the same time, the democratic values that undergird our alliance are under increasing pressure, both internally and externally. Russia and China are both seeking to drive a wedge in our transatlantic solidarity. We're seeing an increase in malicious cyber activity. But our alliance is a strong foundation on which our collective security and our shared prosperity can continue to be built.
And in terms of also how he assesses President Putin before this big meeting, President Biden said that he found him to be quite smart and savvy, and in his own words, a worthy adversary. So that's just really reflective of the thinking, Garrett, of course, going into this meeting. But this day at NATO was critical as well in terms of trying to come back and really restore this alliance and the U.S. commitment after former President Trump, of course, called the NATO alliance obsolete all those years ago and continually criticized it.
Monica, maybe the most notable of the president's meeting with world leaders today was with Turkish President Erdogan. What did those two talk about? And why is Turkey's relationship with the U.S. so critical right now?
Of all of the bilateral meetings we've seen in the last few days, this one was the shortest in terms of the public presentation. The president literally said like 6 words, Garrett. He said, we had a very good meeting, and that was it. He didn't want to read out much more of it, but we do know after that he did come to the presser and say that the two sides are going to continue to be talking about these critical issues. But we know that as a part of this discussion, there were a lot of areas of disagreement as well. For example, the United States making the decision to recognize the Armenian genocide just a couple of months ago, with President Biden becoming the first commander-in-chief to do so. That's something, of course, that President Erdogan rejects and has claimed Turkey is not responsible for. So we do know that those things came up, but they are not reading out those details, though the president did say he believes that the Turkish-U.S. relationship is only going to get stronger from here, and projected a lot of confidence, even though we do know, of course, that's one of the thornier relationships he's navigating right now.
Yeah, so President Biden and these NATO world leaders ending today's summit by agreeing to take action against Russia and China. What steps are they planning to take in order to counter threats from these two countries?
So often after these summits, the world leaders get together and they release what's known as a communique, which is really a wish list of things they would like to do, pledges on the international stage. But it's another thing, Garrett, to really see whether that is anything that is held accountable or that much comes from it. But what they did put together in this one today that was notable is many of them said they did want to confront more threats from Russia and China. And that's something that President Biden has made his entire week-long trip about. He has said he is trying to really rally the world's democracies against autocracies. And that's exactly the theme heading into this meeting with President Putin. And it was notable also that he said, again, in these behind doors meetings, behind the scenes, closed doors, he has told these leaders, I am going to convey to President Putin that I'm not seeking to really confront Russia in a way that will result in conflict, but that if Russia continues some of its malign activities, that the United States will very, very much make it clear that there will be consequences. So that is sort of what he is trying to set the stage for here going into these Geneva talks. But so much of this is going to be a little bit theatrical, and a lot of it is going to be what we don't see, Garrett. Again, without a joint presser, we won't see Presidents Biden and Putin together here in Geneva. Instead, after their meetings, both sides are going to do their own kind of readouts, trying to say, here's everything we raised, here's where we agreed, here's where we disagreed. Of course, the key there will be where the actual truth is, given both versions, and of course, President Putin's inclination to usually exaggerate or misrepresent what happened. So that is what we await here as the president makes his way after another day of the EU summit tomorrow, wrapping up in Belgium, before he heads here to Geneva tomorrow evening for that huge meeting.
Very different from what we saw with former President Trump. NBC's Monica Alba traveling ahead of the president in Geneva tonight. Thank you. Now to that NBC News worldwide exclusive. Ahead of his summit with President Biden, Russian President Vladimir Putin sitting down for a one-on-one interview with NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons. Keir is in Moscow with some of the highlights.
Hey there, Garrett. Good day to you. Here in Moscow, President Putin is preparing to fly to Geneva for that high-stakes meeting with President Biden. I sat down with him inside the Kremlin and pressed him on key issues like human rights and cyber attacks.
Well, we have been accused of all kinds of things, election interference, cyber attacks, and so on and so forth. And not one time did they bother to produce any kind of evidence or proof, just unfounded accusations. I'm surprised that we have not yet been accused of provoking the Black Lives Matter movement.
Russian-speaking criminals, is the allegation, are targeting the American way of life: food, gas, water, hospitals, transport. Why would you let Russian-speaking criminals disrupt your diplomacy?
You know, the simplest thing to do would be for us to sit down calmly and agree on joint work in cyberspace. We are willing to engage with international participants, including the United States. You are the ones who have refused to engage in joint work. Let us sit down together, talk, look for compromise solutions that are acceptable for all the parties. That is how stability is achieved.
Well, President Biden says one time when you met, you were inches away from each other. And he said to you, I'm looking in your eyes and I can't see a soul. And you said, we understand each other. Do you remember that exchange?
But I do not remember this particular part of our conversations, to be honest with you. He probably has a good memory.
A Russian court has just outlawed organizations connected to Mr. Navalny. Literally every non-systematic opposition figure is facing criminal charges. Mr. President, it's as if dissent is simply not tolerated in Russia anymore.
Well, you are presenting it as dissent and intolerance towards dissent in Russia. we view it completely differently.
Will you commit that you will personally ensure that Alexei Navalny will leave prison alive?
I proceed from the premise that the person that you have mentioned, the same kind of measures will apply, not in any way worse than to anybody else who happens to be in prison.
His name is Alexei Navalny. People will note that you
I don't care.
to say
I don't
that
care.
he would leave prison alive.
And after our interview, President Putin continued the conversation with me. He was leaning in, he was looking into my eyes and urging me to believe him that, for example, he believes that opposition groups here in Russia are being funded by the West. Perhaps, Garrett, that was the former KGB officer trying to use his powers of persuasion, or perhaps President Putin, as well as being a threat, does genuinely also feel threatened. Understanding who President Putin really is will be crucial for President Biden when he sits down with him this week.
NBC's Keir Simmons in Moscow, and you can see more of Keir's exclusive interview with Vladimir Putin on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, MSNBC, and NBCnews.com. And the parents of Trevor Reed, a Marine veteran jailed in Russia and diagnosed with COVID, sat down with today's Savannah Guthrie. The Reeds are hoping President Biden will push for their son's release when he meets with Putin on Wednesday. Here's a portion of that interview.
These have been difficult years, but in particular difficult weeks recently. After Trevor was diagnosed with COVID, you went weeks without any contact whatsoever. Do you have any update on his condition? Have you been able to have any contact or any word from him?
No, we just know that he was sent there, and we know he was sick for a week before because we were getting messages, and then when he met with his attorneys on the 24th, he still had a fever and he'd lost his sense of smell, and yet the prison signed a note saying that he was healthy to travel to court. And then the next day they notified the attorneys that it might have been exposed because he's positive for COVID. And it took a week of the embassy and finally the lawyers making formal requests for COVID. They wouldn't even give him a test for COVID, which I think is pretty standard in their jails. And then once he had it, they isolated him, and they won't let the embassy speak to him. The embassy contacts the jail, foreign ministry, and everyone every day trying to make contact with Trevor to actually find out his condition. And they've been denied over this, I don't know what it is, 18, 19-day period now.
So you have no idea
and also I'd like
how he's doing?
No, not really, no. And we just know he had chest pain and cough and fevers and all of that. So, but also one thing about the possible prisoner exchange.
Yes.
You want?
Yep. Yeah, we're very happy to hear that President Putin is open to a prisoner exchange, and we hope that that's something that happens very soon because Trevor and Paul Whelan both have been there long enough, considering that they're innocent of the files of the charges against them. So,
and we don't care. We don't care how he comes home.
Yeah.
If they want to exchange Trevor for some criminals that were, low-level criminals or whatever,
we're fine with that.
Hey,
we want our son home.
Our American prisons then don't have to pay for their housing. Send them home.
And this is an important week. Obviously, President Biden and President Putin are going to sit down face to face. The administration has said Trevor's case and Paul Whelan's case will come up. What do you expect from that meeting? And do you expect and hope that President Biden demands the release of your son?
Yeah, we're very hopeful, and because the Biden administration and Secretary Blinken have been very outspoken about our son, which was a change, and we were very happy to see that, and they're committed to it. And what we would say is, of all the major issues between our countries, this prisoner exchange is probably the easiest thing that they could do, and if they can accomplish anything in this summit, it would be this exchange.
Extremely gracious. That's how President Biden described Queen Elizabeth after his historic meeting at her home on Sunday. The Queen has only hosted 4 other U.S. presidents inside Windsor Castle. NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell has more on their visit.
It was a dazzling afternoon for tea at Windsor Castle. Queen Elizabeth II hosting President Joe Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden at Windsor, the nearly 1,000-year-old castle where she has spent much of her time since the pandemic. The pageantry fit for a queen, or in this case, a president. The president taking part in an inspection of the Guard of Honor. This time, no obvious hiccups. The Queen's official 95th birthday was celebrated at Windsor the day before. After their private tea, President Biden telling Peter Alexander she wanted to discuss world affairs.
She wanted to know what the two leaders that I'm about to meet with, Mr. Putin and Xi Jinping.
Biden also called the Queen extremely gracious.
I don't think she'd be insulted, but you bet my mother. She reminded me of my mother in terms of the look of her and just the generosity.
This was not the monarch's first meeting with Biden. He met her as a senator in 1982 and earlier in the weekend at a G7 reception in Cornwall.
And their life.
Dr. Jill Biden has worked with Prince Harry on the Invictus Games for wounded veterans and visited a school Friday with the Duchess of Cambridge.
Hello, everyone.
Who spoke about Harry and Meghan's newborn daughter Lilibet for the first time.
Your Royal Highness, do you have any wishes for your new niece, Lilibet?
Oh, I wish her all the very best. I can't wait to meet her because we haven't yet met her yet. So hopefully that will be soon.
Let's go to NBC News Now. Correspondent Simone Boyce. She's following the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Hey, Simone.
Hey, Garrett, great to see you. Unfortunately, we start with that tragedy that happened in Texas over the weekend. One man is dead after a mass shooting in Austin, Texas. 25-year-old Douglas John Cantor died from his injuries. The attack leaving more than a dozen people wounded. Authorities are still searching for one of two suspects. Well, the biotech company Novavax saying today its experimental COVID vaccine is safe and 100% effective against moderate to severe disease. The results are from the company's phase 3 clinical trials in the U.S. and in Mexico. Novavax says it plans to apply for FDA authorization in the third quarter of this year. Now, if approved, we would have 4 vaccines available in the U.S. And CEO Elon Musk says Tesla will resume accepting Bitcoin transactions once it confirms that there's reasonable clean energy usage by cryptocurrency miners. Now, the company halted car purchases with Bitcoin last month. And another story out of Texas, one person is dead and 7 others are injured after a car broke through a guardrail, ran into a crowd, and then hit 3 other vehicles at a mud track racing event. It's still unclear why the car drove into that guardrail in the first place. And now to Illinois, where a massive 4-alarm fire at a chemical plant is prompting a full-scale evacuation of everyone within 1 mile of that facility. The company manufactures fluids, lubricants, and grease products. And in a statement, ChemTool says it doesn't know the cause of the fire, but it will be working with local authorities to determine exactly what happened. And we should add, we don't know yet if anyone is injured. Some crazy pictures there, though. Garrett, I'll send it back to you.
Yeah, that fire was really something. Simone Boyce, thank you. And lawmakers in both the Senate and the House are back on Capitol Hill today. Representatives returning for the first time in nearly a month with a full to-do list. On it, everything from infrastructure to censure resolutions and investigations over Trump DOJ's Apple subpoenas. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell is here to discuss it all. And Leanne, let's start with the latest on the Trump DOJ subpoenas. According to the New York Times, 2 people briefed on the matter say Trump's Justice Department subpoenaed Apple in 2018 about an account belonging to Trump's White House counsel at the time, Don McGahn. Now Democrats are demanding testimony from key DOJ officials. I want to note that NBC News has reached out to McGahn and Apple for a response. But what do we know about this portion of the story, Leanne?
Hey, Garrett. So we know that the head of the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, put out a new statement today saying that he spoke with the Attorney General and he is pleased that and has confidence in the investigation that is opened over at the Department of Justice by the Inspector General. That's something that Merrick Garland has also said today that he supports as well. And this came after a lot of frustration late last week from Representative Schiff, who was getting few to zero answers from the Department of Justice about what in fact fact happened regarding this subpoena into his metadata. Now, this, as far as Congress is concerned, they don't plan to step aside and let the Department of Justice take handle of everything. They also plan some investigations, perhaps legislation, and perhaps even subpoenaing the former attorneys general, Barr and Sessions. But looks like it's going to be a mostly partisan take. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was just on the Senate floor a few moments ago calling it something like a witch hunt, and saying that the Department of Justice had the ability to investigate members of Congress and its staff. Garrett.
Leanne, a lot of focus the end of this month on voting rights. In a letter to colleagues today, Speaker Pelosi calling for urgent action on voting rights. What did she say? And is there anything she can say that'll move the needle where the action is on this over in the Senate?
Well, she's trying. This is the second letter in a week that she has put out to her colleagues about voting rights. So this signals the priority and the importance of this legislation. And especially this month, the month of June, is when Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said he's going to put it on the floor. Now, in this letter, she writes that voter suppression has been deepened by the suffocation of the airwaves caused by big, dark special interest money. H.R. 1 sheds light on the crisis by requiring disclosure of dark special interest money and empowering the grassroots of small donors. So that's just one part of what this massive piece of legislation does. But as you mentioned, Garrett, the challenge is in the Senate. That legislation already passed the House, and all eyes once again are on Senator Joe Manchin on if he's willing to come out and support it. But if he does, there's still not 10 Senate Republicans that would enable it to pass, Garrett.
I see a couple weeks off did nothing for the mood in the House. Today, Republicans released a censure resolution calling out members of the squad made up of Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley. Who's leading the charge on this censure resolution, and what is this about?
Yeah, Representative Jim Banks of Indiana, Representative Waltz of Florida, and Claudia Tenney of New York, three conservative members of Congress who say that those members of Congress have compared and defended foreign terrorist organizations. And so this censure resolution could be brought up. Of course, the Republicans are not in control, but they could force this on the House floor. And this is just trying to put the political spotlight on Democrats and members of the squad and equating them with the rest of the Democratic Party. And so this is an issue that Republicans want to keep talking about, Garrett.
Two can play at this game. Democrats are also planning to introduce a censure resolution targeting Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. What's going on there?
They sure are. It seems like years ago, but this, controversy over Marjorie Taylor Greene and her equating mask wearing to the Holocaust happened in the 3 weeks when Congress was out of session, not in Washington. So now Congress is back. Representative Brad Schneider, Democrat from Illinois, plans to offer a censure resolution against Marjorie Taylor Greene on Wednesday, and that one is also expected to get a vote. So we could have a week of competing condemnations of members of Congress, Garrett.
Leanne, I know there's a ton of pressure on different elements of the Hill to figure out a plan on infrastructure. Here's Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez over the weekend making the case for Democrats to go it alone. Listen.
There's a fork in the road, which is, do we settle for much less and an infrastructure package that has been largely designed by Republicans in order to get 60 votes, or can we really transform this country, create millions of union jobs, revamp our power grid, get people's bridges fixed and schools rebuilt with 51 or 50 Democratic votes? And I think the argument that we need to make here is that it's worth going it alone if we can do more for working people in this country.
So, Leanne, we know that bipartisan group of senators were able to reach a tentative deal late last week, but where do things stand on all of this today?
Well, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and progressive members, of course, want a big $4 trillion one piece of legislation on infrastructure. But there are not the 50 votes in the Senate yet for that. And so they are still discussing this bipartisan bill over in the Senate. They have not released a lot of details in that legislation. We know that they're talking about paying for it by reusing COVID money, indexing the gas tax to inflation. But it's a very tricky balancing act because this isn't just a palace intrigue of progressives versus moderates. The fact is there's such a slim Democratic majority. Democratic leadership needs the progressives and the moderates to all vote for the same piece of legislation for it to pass. And Democrats haven't yet figured out which way it's going to get enough votes in order to reach the president's desk, Garrett.
Got one more for you, Leanne. Both houses of Congress back today. First time in a long time for the House. They'll return to new rules in the sort of post-COVID Washington, D.C. What's changing on the Hill?
No masks are necessary anymore on the House floor. They were the final holdouts. Votes will happen much quicker. There's not going to be staggered voting. And so most of the restrictions for COVID up here on Capitol Hill are finally gone, Garrett.
And our favorite coffee shop on the Hill is back.
Oh.
Leanne Caldwell.
How could I forget? I bought you a coffee, Garrett, today. It's waiting for you.
Thank you. In a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court ruling today that a revised federal law does not allow prison inmates to seek a reduced sentence for possessing small amounts of crack cocaine. NBC News justice correspondent Pete Williams is in Washington. And Pete, this case was based on that bipartisan law called the First Step Act, which made sweeping changes to the criminal justice system. What did the court say in today's ruling?
Well, it actually has its roots in the congressional crackdown on crack cocaine in the 1980s, when Congress said somebody who possessed a small amount of crack cocaine would be sentenced as though they had the 100 times that amount in powder cocaine. It involved a Florida man who had 4 grams of cocaine. Now, a paperclip like this weighs a gram, so the amount of crack cocaine weighing 4 paper clips. But he was charged with, in essence, the same thing he would have been charged with if he had had a pound of powder cocaine. Then Congress changed the law and said that removed that sentencing disparity, or at least reduced it. What the First Step Act did is it allowed people already serving their sentences to go back into court and challenge their sentences to get that reduction. So the question was, could this Florida man do that? And today the Supreme Court said the answer is no, that may have been the intent of the people who wrote the law, but the only ones who can do that are people who were sentenced under laws that triggered mandatory minimums, and his amount of cocaine was below that. So people who possess small amounts of crack cocaine like him cannot take advantage of the First Step Act.
That's fascinating. I understand that Justice Sonia Sotomayor agreed with the decision, but also wrote that Congress should go back and fix this. What did she suggest? How did she suggest they do this?
Exactly right. She traced the legacy of it. She said it was rooted in essence, racism, because crack cocaine was more of a problem in inner cities. And then she wrote this: there is no apparent reason that career offenders should be left to serve out sentences that were unduly influenced by the 100-to-1 ratio. Unfortunately, the text of the law, she means, will not bear that reading. Fortunately, Congress has numerous tools to right this injustice. So, message to Congress: if you want to fix this, you should do so, she says.
And check your work before you finish the bill. Pete, switching to DOJ news, the Justice Department's top national security official, John Demers, is resigning amid fallout that the department secretly seized those records from Democrats and members of the media. What do we know about his departure, and is it related to that scandal, or is it just weird timing?
The Justice Department officials we've talked to say it's more the latter, that John Demers, who came in during the Trump administration, had planned to leave around this time anyway. Once his children got out of school's out, so he says he's going to leave. They say it is not related to all these disclosures about the subpoenas, and that he had planned to do this for several months.
All right, then. NBC's Pete Williams. Thank you.
You bet.
A threat to democracy. That's what a judge is calling one accused Capitol rioter who's being transferred to a state prison in Pennsylvania. Just one of several legal developments from the January 6th attack on the Capitol that we're watching this week. NBC's investigative reporter for the Washington station here, WRC, Scott McFarland, joins me now. And Scott, what can you tell us about this defendant and their transfer to Pennsylvania?
Yeah, Garrett, let me tell you about Ryan Samsel from the Philadelphia area. He had been jailed in the Washington, D.C. jail, the one that's about 10 minutes away from us here at the Capitol. On January 6th, he's accused of knocking over a police officer and a police barricade and knocking the officer unconscious. He'd been seeking his release from jail, but the feds wanted him held, saying Samsel has a history of convictions of knocking multiple other women unconscious and an attack on his own pregnant girlfriend in 2011. Judge would not release Samsel, instead transferring him closer to home to a state prison in Pennsylvania where he's wanted for other violations. But I noted this in the judge's decision, saying that Samsel is a threat to democracy, among other things. Just a little more shade federal judges are throwing at Donald Trump and the ongoing denial of the elections. That denial of the elections, of the fairness and legitimacy of the elections, is really working against a lot of these defendants, Garrett. They're seeking to be released from jail, but judges are saying as the denialism continues, some of these defendants remain threats.
And Scott, you're also reporting on some charges against members of the far-right group known as the Three Percenters. First of all, who are they, and what charges are federal prosecutors looking into?
Now, arraignment just a few moments ago for several accused Three Percenters. They're all from California. Three Percenters is a reference to the colonial era, the Revolutionary era, when 3% of the colonials fought against the British. They invoked the revolution, federal prosecutors say, when they were on Capitol grounds here January 6th, these 6 accused 3%ers. They had their arraignment, and in a court filing just a few minutes ago, the feds sought that at least one of them remain in jail pending future hearings. We're still trying to get organized on this case, but this case is noteworthy, Garrett. The charges are among the most serious. This group is charged with conspiracy, with potential organizing of January 6th, and it's the earliest conspiracy on the timeline so far. They say some of these discussions began in November and possibly included violence against those who accept the November elections. We're going to watch this case closely as it develops through the week, Garrett.
So could the DOJ investigation into this group have an effect on the way they prosecute other cases involved with the riots?
I think so. I think these are the cases to watch. This really is the epicenter of a sprawling investigation. You have about 500 total defendants, but at these groups of defendants that are accused of being far-right group members, 3%ers, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, who are being held in jail pending trial and also facing the most serious charges. There have been 4 plea agreements so far, Garrett. The first one was against an accused member of the Oath Keepers. He had to promise to cooperate with the investigation to get that plea deal. We watched 2 other defendants plead guilty late this afternoon. They are facing lesser charges, not accused of conspiracy or violence. They did not have to promise cooperation as part of their plea deal. So it's clear, Garrett, the focus of prosecutors on these far-right groups.
And Scott, I understand you also have new reporting on tomorrow's House oversight hearing on the Capitol riots. FBI Director Christopher Wray is supposed to be there. What else can you tell us?
Well, Garrett, you know how this happens. A lot of these hearings happen simultaneously on the Hill. There are 2 hearings at the same time tomorrow on January 6th. The House Oversight Committee is going to question FBI Director Wray. The House Administration Committee questions the Inspector General of Capitol Police. But at that first hearing, the Republicans wanted the acting Capitol Police Chief to appear to testify. She has turned them down. The Republicans, in a statement a few moments ago, blamed the majority for not making the chief appear. According to the Republican statement, Garrett, the chief says she wants to watch that other hearing, so can't appear at the first. It's always worth remembering and reminding people the Capitol Police Chief does work for Congress.
The acting chief, and maybe not for that much longer. Scott McFarland, the reporter to follow on this story from our affiliate here in Washington, WRC. Scott, thank you.
Thank you, Garrett.
It's time for The Bottom Line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. On tap this week, May's retail sales, the producer price index, and earnings season winding down, plus the Federal Reserve's June meeting. CNBC correspondent Rahel Solomon is here to break it down for all of us. And Rahel, there are a few key economic reports out this week, most notably tomorrow's retail sales for May and the producer price index. So what are you watching with these 2 reports, and why do they matter?
Yeah, Garrett, hi. So lots of data this week. So on Tuesday, as you said, we get the May reading on retail sales. Let's look at how and where people are spending in retail. That matters because consumer spending is such a big part of our economy. It's responsible for more than 2/3 of our economy. Excluding automobiles, the expectation for May is about 0.5% growth. We'll also get PPI, or Producer Price Index. The top line consensus here is also 0.5% higher. That's a look at the change in prices from the producers of products from their vantage point. So another indicator of possible inflation. Inflation, Garrett, something that market watchers have been watching for quite some time now, at least a couple of months, with concerns that prices rising too high, too quickly, and the potential impact that could have on spending. And as we just said, spending such a huge part of the economy. So that's the concern there.
Absolutely. I understand you've got your eye on a few other economic reports. What else should we be looking for this week?
Yeah, so we also get a lot of housing data this week. So we get May housing starts and June home builder sentiment on Tuesday. Housing starts, essentially the number of homes where construction has actually begun or started. And then home builder sentiment is a survey of builders about sales conditions, buyer traffic, and sales expectations. As we know, the housing market has been red hot. So the housing reports are always very interesting these days just because of how hot the market has been.
Stock is so low. So also we got the Federal Reserve meeting Tuesday, Wednesday. What are you watching for there? And why is this two-day meeting important to the average American? I mean, is this the one to watch for inflation concerns?
Yes and no. So it's probably the most important report this week is in terms of investors. So, yeah, we'll hear from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell on Wednesday afternoon. It's a two-day meeting. Central bank not exactly expected to take any action, so that's why I say no. But it could adjust its forecast for interest rates and inflation. So that adjustment is why I say yes. We have heard from some of the Federal Reserve presidents that they may be beginning to think about talking about raising interest rates, which is to say time isn't necessarily right now, but they're getting closer to even starting the conversation. Now, Garrett, if we do hear any tweaks or adjustments to that forecast, whether explicitly or even just hinted at, that could create some movement in the markets and volatility. It's important because the Federal Reserve does set the interest rates that banks then use to set as a benchmark to lend to Americans via mortgage rates and car loans. So, yes, it is a very important meeting. Probably not where we're here about raising interest rates, but important nonetheless.
Everybody's reading tea leaves. And Rahel, earnings season is now winding down, but I understand some big names are still reporting. Who do we hear from this week?
Yeah, so speaking of housing, we'll hear from home builder Lennar. They report on Thursday, and then we'll also hear from software makers Adobe and Oracle, plus supermarket Kroger, going to shed some light on grocery shopping and inflation when it reports on Thursday. So for a summer week, it's a very busy week for economic data this week, Garrett.
No rest on the market. CNBC's Rahel Solomon, thank you.
Sure.
With pandemic restrictions easing, many people are opening up their wallets and spending money like they're making up for lost time. But which industries are benefiting most from the so-called revenge spending effect? Let's bring in Ben Kaplan, the chief economist for Top Data. And Ben, your team analyzed data from 12 million Americans as part of Top Data's Pandemic Recovery Index. Break it down for us. What industries are seeing the surge in spending right now? And what does it tell us about post-pandemic life?
Sure. Well, great to be with you, Garrett. And I think the first thing to realize is revenge spending is the effect where consumers, like, you only live once. This is the now. This is the moment. So industries where this is a big effect, it's surging, include for right now, personal services, beauty salons, nail salons, 56% above normal. So that's like taking the normal level before the pandemic and actually 56% more in terms of or other industries like sporting goods stores, restaurants, apparel and clothes. Also, so right now people are making up for lost time, and even car dealerships. Garrett, I don't know if you've been saving up for that Lamborghini. Right now, Lamborghini is sold out almost through the year. Even if you're not getting a Lamborghini right now, car dealerships, more people are in the stores, but also looking for a more expensive model, a few more options.
I'd have to move my Maserati to park it. It'd be a mess. The revenge spending bump clearly can't be universal, right? We're spending less in some areas. What industries are pacing below pre-pandemic levels?
Sure. Well, I think the industries where people maybe either aren't quite confident enough, that's amusement parks, down 43% from before the pandemic, but also when the people had replacements during the pandemic. So Bookstores, about 12% below normal. Electronics stores, 11% below normal. But one of the things to look at is the lagging effect on this, because, for instance, movie theaters, 3 weeks ago, 64% below normal. Now, only 12% below normal. So some are seeing a little bit of a bounce back, even if they're not surging with vengeance right now.
So I was interested in this. Your recovery index also found that Vermont is recovering the best of any of the 50 states, while bigger states like New York and California are still struggling in comparison. Can you talk a little bit about the state rankings and what are some of the key indicators in determining how states are doing in this index?
Sure. I mean, number one right now, Vermont, number two, Mississippi, number three, Rhode Island. And the funny thing is you're saying, well, these are all smaller states. Why is that? Well, smaller states are benefiting from a few things right now. One, they're a lot less complex states, a little bit easier to get at, like a sort of a kick in the pants for the economy. But also, they're getting more out-of-state visitors coming into the state as we see this sort of urban to rural trend. And also, more people have moved to the state, so that's helping the economy bounce back as well. So I think a way to think about this is actually you can look at what happened in China a few months back. I mean, China is sort of preceding us in this sort of pandemic recovery and surge. They had industries like luxury goods, fashion, jewelry reach record levels. China. So we're kind of following that track a little bit. It's being led by the smaller states. And at the same time, we're UK and Europe, they're lagging behind us by about 3 months because their vaccine rollout's a little bit slower. So what this is basically tracking is consumer confidence. When they have confidence in the vaccine, confidence in life returning to normal, they're spending with a vengeance.
That is so fascinating. All right, Ben Kaplan, thank you so much. The surge in online shopping during the pandemic has led to an unintended consequence: more traffic on our country's roads. And with people getting back to normal, it's only going to get worse. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson shows us.
After a year of largely untraveled freeways, Americans are hitting the road and finding a new source of congestion: delivery trucks. Experts say it's due to a surge in online ordering during the pandemic, and companies like Amazon adding more trucks for even faster delivery. A recent survey found that nationwide, over the course of 2020, total deliveries rose by almost 28%. Groceries in particular jumped by a staggering 103%. If you've driven in a city recently, you've seen it.
This FedEx truck double parked. FedEx truck double parked, blocking traffic. This is the third truck that we've seen as we speak, a UPS truck, double parked, blocking traffic. I can barely get around, and this is what drivers are dealing with.
And with more trucks out on the road, those in charge of local infrastructure have their work cut out for them.
We monitor traffic on a 24-hour basis.
Here in Los Angeles, a city synonymous with driving, we were shown the Regional Traffic Management Center for Caltrans.
Los Angeles and Long Beach ports carry 40% of the nation's imports. We have a lot of trucks, and as trucks are more on the pavement, we do see wear and tear on the pavement.
And that has a price tag. By one estimate, bumpy roads cost California drivers $61 billion annually.
Our lifestyle of online ordering has made truck congestion a real problem, and it's made worse every time you click that same day or next day button, putting more pressure on companies to deliver packages faster, which obviously makes the roads more congested, and it really pounds infrastructure and highways just like this one.
And it's only going to get worse. According to projections from the World Economic Forum, delivery vehicles in the top 100 cities globally will rise 36% by 2030, increasing congestion by over 21% and adding an average of 11 minutes to your daily commute. For its part, FedEx told us in a statement their trucks are a critical link in accommodating rapid growth in e-commerce and meeting fast-changing consumer demands. Amazon and UPS weren't available for comment.
Do you think this is something that is going to be a measurable problem for Caltrans?
It's just a new way of doing commerce.
Ensuring our nation's roadways remain clear and resilient as we get back to normal.
What does the U.S. government know about UFOs? The Pentagon is releasing a report on that very question later this month. And suddenly, everyone from senators to scientists to presidents to journalists are talking seriously about a topic once thought to be more science fiction than actual science. NBCNews.com senior politics reporter Alex Seitz-Wald joins me now. And Alex, you've been reporting on the excitement around this upcoming Pentagon report, where everybody from scientists to people who you might typically think of as conspiracy theorists are celebrating the lift of what's called the truth embargo. About a third of Americans think we've been visited by alien spacecraft, according to a recent Gallup poll. So what are some of the people you spoke to expecting from this Pentagon report?
Yeah, Garrett. Well, first of all, what's not expected in this report is, spoiler alert, aliens. The U.S. government is not going to come out and say we've had contact phase. I'm very sorry. But what we're kind of expecting is basically a document dump from across the government of files that they've collected over about 2 decades from something like 120 different sightings of what is accurately described as unexplained aerial phenomenon. So these could be weather patterns, these could be camera optical effects, these could be potentially spy craft by foreign governments like Russia or China, that, you know, some new advanced technology that we don't know about, or potentially it could be aliens even. But basically what everyone is excited about, that I was really struck by, from the believers who, you know, think the aliens are here to the hardcore skeptics who spend their whole time debunking that stuff, is they think it's good that we're finally having this conversation in the open, and we can try to understand these unexplained phenomenon, because so far this has just been not taken seriously. It's been totally ridiculed, even though we have people like Navy pilots, former CIA directors coming forward and saying, yeah, there are things that we don't really understand.
I had a very serious conversation with Marco Rubio about this in a Senate hallway not that long ago. You spoke to some scientists for this story, too, who noted that some of our biggest scientific discoveries come from investigating things that were weird or misunderstood. I think the idea is that even if we don't get firm answers from the Pentagon, we can learn something by looking and by asking questions about all this, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That basically, you know, science is a process of discovery, and to just foreclose an entire area of investigation and say there's no purpose in looking into that, that's not, you know, how we learn anything. And yeah, you can go through the history of science and find all kinds of examples of this. Like, you know, scientists didn't think meteorites actually came from space until the early 1800s, or naturalists coming back from Africa to, say, London in the, you know, 1700s would talk about these animals with 15-foot long necks, and no one believed them. They were giraffes, of course. So the idea is, you know, if we have more cameras, more sensors, we have all this new technology, if we use this, we might discover some really rare weather phenomenon or some rare Earth-based phenomenon that we don't know anything about, or some enemy, you know, spy craft that we don't know anything about. And it's probably good, if there's things that we don't understand, to understand what they are.
Well, the truth is out there. It just may be mundane. Alex, right. Some of the people you spoke to are totally convinced that the government is covering up evidence of extraterrestrial life. Can you talk about the consequences of people thinking there's a government cover-up? And can a Pentagon report dispel the belief that this is a cover-up if people are convinced the government's lying about this anyway?
Well, to answer your second question, no. I mean, this is people who believe this are going to continue to believe this. But I think it's a really great question and a great point, because, you know, we're at a moment right now where conspiracy theories have gone totally mainstream, where distrust of the government is at an all-time high. And this is one place where, you know, the government has actually legitimately covered stuff up in the past. In the 50s and 60s, at the beginning of the Cold War, American civilians started seeing U.S. spy planes that they didn't recognize. And the government had an official policy where they would deny that what people saw. They would try to create ridicule around this. This is, you know, proven through declassified documents. So there has been in the past, at least, an actual government cover-up. It just wasn't covering up aliens. It was covering up secret American spy planes. So, I think there's this kind of feedback loop effect where the government keeps something secret. In that vacuum, people invent conspiracy theories, and then legitimate scholars stay away from it because it's dominated by kooks, and they kind of get run of the whole mill, where, you know, now if we can talk about it openly, the government can show what it has on its books, then maybe we can dispel some of the conspiracy theories and try to learn some new things about our world.
This is fascinating stuff. NBC's Alex Seitz-Wald, thank you.
Thanks.
A violent weekend across America. 10 cities are dealing with mass shootings in just the last 3 days. In Austin, Texas, 14 people were shot early Saturday, one of them killed. And in Savannah, Georgia, another person killed Friday night and 8 injured. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park has more.
Garrett, manhunts are underway across the country in several cities after gun violence rocked these communities. In Austin, Texas, early Saturday morning, 14 people were shot in a busy downtown area, the entertainment district on 6th Street, where there were lots of restaurants and bars. And unfortunately, a 25-year-old man died from his injuries. Officials are saying that right now one suspect is in custody, but another person is at large. And it's likely that this all stemmed from some sort of dispute between two different groups. Now, this was quite the chaotic scene. We're told that there were lots of crowds in the area, crowds that were comparable to what we saw pre-pandemic because everything is back open. But fortunately, a lot of officers were already in the area, so they were able to move in quickly and render aid to the wounded. Meanwhile, there was another mass shooting in Savannah, Georgia that happened Friday night, and this was a little bit different. This happened in a residential community, and officials are saying that someone in a vehicle drove in front of an apartment complex. There was a large crowd out front, and someone began firing into the crowd. Approximately 60 shell casings were recovered at the scene. Right now, they're asking any witnesses to come forward because they don't have any suspects at this time, but investigators are looking into a possible connection with this shooting and another shooting that happened on that same street just a couple days prior. And Garrett, now this is a trend that we are seeing all across the country. You know, you had the mass shooting in Austin, Texas, but also in Savannah, Georgia. But according to Gun Violence Archive, they are noticing that gun violence is on the rise. So far, mass shootings so far this year, that number is approximately 270, and that number continues to climb. And when you compare that number to this time last year, mass shootings have gone up approximately 40%.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.